Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I have gifts from a viewer. I recently took a class to learn a new knitting style that I'm excited about for an upcoming project. And I had a reunion with some old friends that led to me promising to make some custom fit socks. So let's get started. A couple of weeks ago, after I filmed Casual Friday, I got a notification that I had received a package in my P.O. box. So I went down to the post office, picked up the package, saw that it was from Alaska, and I could kind of tell from how the package felt what was probably in it. So I brought it home, I opened it up. I didn't open it on camera. I did film an overhead shot of what was in the package, and I want to show you that now. And let me just say a big thank you to Craig for sending that package to me. It's really appreciated, and I'm looking forward to using the contents. Thank you so much. So there was a lovely note in there from Craig, who lives in Alaska, and he mentioned he's been following for years. I have seen his comments on videos every so often, so I'm familiar with him. And he went to a shop and saw these yarns, and he thought I would like them. So there's two of them that are called Infinity Sock. They're from Laine. And I did find a sock pattern that was written for this yarn, and it's translated. So it took me a bit to kind of figure out what was going on. But you're meant to start them at the toe. So you have a contrast toe, and then the leg is solid, and then after you turn the heel, you have this leg. So it's not clear on some of the, I will use my own sock pattern. They were using a smaller needle for the foot and then a larger one when you start to do the heel and go up the leg. Not clear why. And it's a larger needle than what the ball band suggests. So I'm not really clear on that sock pattern. But again, I can make my own sock pattern, but it was good to know that these are meant to be worked toe up so that you get the solid part on the foot. So these are really beautiful yarns. So there's this one that's kind of got these different shades of blue, and then this one that's got some blue and then these earth tones in it. Now the other thing that was in here, and I spoiled the surprise because I didn't really understand what was going on. There was this little sticker in here that says Woolens and Nosh, Advent 2025. Now I'm familiar with Advent yarns from indie dyers, and usually I associate it with these Advents. You open a different little package every day, and I didn't understand what I was seeing. So there were these two little skeins here, and then there's this snapped little tote bag with these two strands coming out. And what I didn't notice at first was that there was a sticker. It says scan for info. I just didn't know that that's what I should be doing beforehand if I wanted this to be a surprise, because some people want their Advent calendar things to be a surprise. So if this is something that you have signed up for, I'm about to spoil it, so you might want to skip forward. I'll put on the screen what time you can skip to in order to not have the spoil. So what's inside is two identical cakes of yarn, and the idea is that the initial one is the same color as this contrast, so this would be used for like cuffs and heels and toes and stuff. And so you start knitting with this, and then when you get to this color again, so you're working a stripe in a different color every day, and when you see this color again, then you stop so that you won't be spoiled for what is happening the next day. So I thought that was really cool. I'm definitely going to make these. I love all of these bright colors. It's really cool. So thank you very much, Craig. That was so sweet of you and thoughtful of you. I probably would have spoiled the surprise for myself anyway, even if I had scanned that code ahead of time. That was a wonderful surprise to find in my P.O. box. Every year, the Minnesota Knitters Guild has an event. It's our annual, it's a big event called Yarn Over. There are classes. We bring in national teachers from all over the country, like 15 or 16 teachers. We have social events. We have meals that you can sign up for, and have, because this takes place at a hotel. You can stay at the hotel for the whole weekend if you're coming from out of town, or even if you're not, you just want to be able to hang out with your friends all day without having to drive home each night. I tend to stay at home. I just drive in the morning. It's maybe a 15-minute drive for me. It's not a big deal. And I always volunteer to do things. And I used to take classes every year. I used to take 2 classes every year, especially, prior to the Master Hand Knitting program, or when I was going through the Master Hand Knitting program. Sometimes there were specific techniques that a national teacher was going to be teaching that I knew I was going to need at some point for the Master Hand Knitting program, and so I'd take that class specifically. Or it would be a class taught by a designer who I really admired, who had written books that I had and just really loved. And I just wanted to take a class from them and just be willing to accept whatever they were going to teach. And sometimes I would take a class because I was teaching at my local yarn shop at the time, but my classes were, a handful of people, maybe 8 at the most. And they were all at a table and I could walk around, and there was a lot more one-on-one, and you could demonstrate and everybody could see. And these were classes that I have 20, 25 people, and it's a different type of setup and you have to teach differently. So sometimes I would take a class just to watch people teach and see, what kind of handouts they had, what kind of slideshow they would do, how they would demonstrate things, all different kinds of ways of observing. But I hadn't taken a class at Yarn Over for years. There just wasn't anything that I was particularly interested in. Like, I don't need to learn about short rows. I know, 9 million different ways of doing short rows. The classes are really good, but they just aren't aimed at me. And so I don't take them. I spend my time socializing and volunteering and enjoying the marketplace and that sort of thing. But this year there was a class that I knew I wanted, and I think it was the very first class to fill too. It was on Portuguese knitting. It was taught by Ana Campos. This was something that I had learned briefly in a Yarn Over class I took years ago. That was taught by Sally Melville. It was a class called 2 Colors, 2 Hands. And it was about teaching stranded color work by holding each of the yarns in a different hand. Most of the people only knew one style of knitting, and so they were there to kind of learn the other one so they could do stranded color work with a yarn in each hand. I could knit continental and English, but my styles were very incompatible. It was very difficult for me to use them together. My method of knitting English involves long straight needles that are anchored against the body. So I don't hold the needle, I just touch it. And I learned continental because that style was not compatible with the knitting in the round. I tried knitting belts and it had it at the wrong angle. I tried all kinds of things. I couldn't make knitting in the round work with my knitting style, even when I tried modifying it. So I learned continental in order to knit in the round with a single color. And so I would struggle when I was doing stranded color work. So I took that class from Sally Melville to kind of figure out how to make them compatible. And she was able to watch me knit for about 20 seconds and then give me some really good tips for what to do when I'm knitting stranded color work. So it's not the method that I use when I knit English on its own. I still use my long straight needles, but if I'm doing stranded color work, it does work. Well, in that class, and this was probably 15 years ago, part of the class, she also introduced us to Portuguese knitting. And I don't believe I had heard of Portuguese knitting prior to that. It was like, and it was so different. It was so interesting, but it was a small amount of time and there weren't a lot of resources either at the time. And also, I don't actually do a lot of stranded color work. I do a lot of texture. And so by the time I came around to wanting to do stranded color work again, I couldn't really remember how to do it. So over the years, the resources have become more available. Andrea Wong has a website, has books, she teaches, so I could learn online if I wanted to. But I just thought this is an opportunity to be in the presence of a teacher who can see that I'm doing something wrong when I'm not aware that I'm doing something wrong, and then immediately correct it instead of me like struggling and trying to figure it out. I just thought it was a great opportunity, so I took it. What's interesting is that I know so much more about knitting now that there were things that she would say to do, she'd tell the class to do, and I would understand why. Like, she didn't explain why because it would have taken a lot of explanation. It's just I understand. I'm like, oh, I see why you this and that and the other thing. So I was able to really get a lot out of that class. This is what I did in the class. These aren't the best contrast colors right here, but this is what we did in the class. We're using bulky weight yarn. Let me see. I should probably, there we go. So there is some unevenness in it because I was learning. But I will say this is the best looking unblocked stranded color work that I have ever knit. The thing about Portuguese knitting is that you have the work inside out so that the purl side is facing you. It really is a great way of knitting stranded color work. So I've been thinking, like, what could I do? I want to do a project with stranded color work. I take 3 walks a day. I take a 15-minute walk after breakfast. I take a 15-minute walk after lunch, and then we take together, my husband and I take a half-hour-ish, maybe sometimes a little more, walk after dinner. And it's starting to get colder. The breakfast and lunch walks are recent additions since like August, which is fine when it's nice out. All I have to do is grab my keys and walk out the door, put shoes on and walk out the door. Now I'm starting to have to bundle up because it's Minnesota and it's fall. The weather's not terrible, but it still means a hat, a scarf, gloves, a jacket with a zipper. And I have this mohair, really lightweight scarf thing that I use, but I'm like, I can tell that as it gets colder, it's not always warm enough. There are other things I end up having to use. And I thought, I think I would like a stranded color work cowl that's like 48, 50 inches long that I can wrap around twice. And it's knit in a tube. So then you have all these extra layers of warmth as well. And then that could, really cover me up here. So that's what I am planning for my stranded colorwork project, and I'm going to use this book here. This is Jamie Lomax. She designs all these doodle patterns, and the idea is that they're 24 stitch repeats, and so you can mix and match all kinds of things, and you use a multiple of 24 for whatever it is you're knitting in the round, although sometimes it can be a multiple of 12 depending on the stitch pattern itself. But she's got great information in here about colors and choosing colors, because that's the thing that always panics me. I'm slightly colorblind, and trying to pick colors, like, oh my God, it's agony. So she's got some good tips in here about how to start with that. So I think that's the project that I am going to do. And I just need to get the yarn for it. I've been looking through and trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do, whether I use the pattern that she has for a cowl, or if I go through the stitch dictionary that's in there and figure my own out. But she's got good help in here about color selection. She's a graphic designer by trade, and so she's very good with things like color and patterns and all that kind of thing. So that is going to be an upcoming project for me that I'm excited about, a little nervous about as well. But I really like the idea of knowing as many different knitting styles as possible, because, as we age and you get this repetition, sometimes if I'm knitting a lot, especially if I'm knitting things that are where I have to shift between knits and purls a lot, maybe it's cables, maybe it's a traveling twisted stitch pattern, and then not only that, but I have to knit through the back. There's a lot of wrist action going on, and they can ache if I knit too long. And so I think it's good to always be able to switch to a different knitting style and give those particular hand and wrist parts a break while you knit in another style. I have been wanting to do some stranded colorwork stuff, and I just haven't gotten around. Again, picking the colors is usually the roadblock for me. So hopefully I can go to the yarn shop this weekend and get some help and find a big selection of colors that will appeal to me and that will work together. I can get some assurance from whoever is helping me that yes, these things go together. So that's my plan, but I'm excited about trying out Portuguese knitting with stranded colorwork. And then there's another method of stranded colorwork about being able to hold them both in one hand in a way that keeps the yarns flowing, which I saw on Fiber Love Diary. Trish on Fiber Love Diary has a way of doing that I've been wanting to practice as well. So I'm going to try both of them on that project and see which one I end up liking better. So I'll keep you posted. In the last Casual Friday, I was showing you a pair of socks that I started at the airport on our way to the Netherlands. That's something I do when we start a trip. It could be a road trip. We get in the car as soon as it's daylight, because sometimes we start a road trip and it's dark out. I start a sock. If we are flying, when we get to the gate at the airport, I start a new pair of socks. And so I did that on our trip to the Netherlands, and I finished one sock, and then I finished the leg and the first couple of rows of the heel of the second one on the return trip. When we got back on Monday, I recorded Casual Friday on Thursday that week, and then on Friday I was leaving for a long weekend trip to see have like a reunion with my college friends. We hadn't all been together for more than 30 years. So that was very exciting. So I wasn't going to start a new pair of socks at the airport. Instead, I took the ones that were in progress and I finished them that weekend. My friends knew that they know I have a YouTube channel, and then I'm a knitter. I wasn't a knitter in college when they all knew me. So that came when I spent a year abroad in Ireland, and that's when I learned to knit. So when I came back, everyone had graduated and they weren't seeing me knit. So I did finish the second sock. And one of the things my friends were fascinated with was self-striping sock yarn. That I wasn't switching colors, that the yarn was doing that, and that it was creating a regular pattern, a striping pattern. Now this is kind of an unusual striping pattern. You almost have to look at it from a distance to even see the stripes. When you're up close, it's almost harder, sort of like an impressionist painting. It's hard to see up close what it is, and then when you get back, you're like, oh, those are stripes. So I'd be sitting there, and it's knitting in the round and stockinette, so I wasn't having to look at it that often. And they're like, oh my God, she didn't even have to, they had to look at it. And, but they were just fascinated. And I was telling them a little bit about, knitting socks to fit, like for myself, and what my fit issues were, and how, I learned about that, and I've done a million videos, and the written tutorial on custom fit socks, the August sock knit along. As I finished it, and people were, they'd be commenting on them. I said, if anybody wants a pair of socks, I'm happy to knit for them. And two of my friends raised their hand right away. One of them, her mother was a voracious knitter and used to knit socks for the kids every Christmas. And her mom is dead now. So, and she's learning to knit. Like, she's wanting to try to learn to knit well enough to be able to potentially finish one of her mother's unfinished projects. I did tell her about the Loose Ends Project, where the Loose Ends Project takes projects of any kind. It could be knitting, crochet, quilting, embroidery, cross stitch, whatever, that a loved one did not finish, and either they died or they're too sick to be able to finish it. And so the Loose Ends Project has volunteers who finish them. I did a project this last winter for someone who ended up being a neighbor of mine. She had just gotten too ill to be able, it was a complex pattern and she just couldn't follow it anymore. And I was able to complete it for her and give it back to her so that she could use it. So I was telling my friend about that and I said, but if you want to be able to knit it yourself, sometimes what you can get from the Loose Ends Project person is lessons from them. Like they'll help you get through the project and so that you can knit it yourself. So whichever ones you wanted. She had asked me a few weeks before we went on the trip, oh, would you teach me to knit? And so I brought yarn and needles, and turns out she knew how to knit and purl. She felt like her consistency wasn't great. She didn't know how to cast on correctly, and she wanted to learn how to do cables, so I taught her how to do that. So that was really fun. But she and one of the other ones were the ones that had their hands up when I said, "Oh, knit socks." My old roommate Linda, she ran upstairs in the house and got some graph paper and a Sharpie, and I traced their feet, and then I took measurements. I take more measurements than a lot of sock patterns indicate. I measure the ankle and the ball of foot. There's an assumption that they're going to be the same, and which is why you knit the foot and the sock, the same stitches. But a lot of people have a good inch difference. Most of the people I knit for have a difference. Not everybody, but a lot do, especially men. Then I measure the heel diagonal, which is like, let's see, how can this part like across there, that circumference around there. Well, the tracing of the foot lets me know how long their foot is and what shape their toes are. And then I ask them how high they want the sock to be on their legs so that I can knit it to the length. Because some people like shorter socks, some people like longer. So I can do that. So I did their feet, and then I'm like, is anybody else, I'm happy to do anybody. And so pretty soon everybody, there's only one who didn't, and he lives in Central Florida. He lives in Orlando, so it's hot there year round. And his mother, who's still alive, lives a mile away, and she's an avid knitter. And he's like, he doesn't need wool socks in Orlando. And I said, I can knit you anything else. I'm also not offended if you don't want anything. That's fine, but I want you to know that the offer is there. So he's like, well, maybe a pair of gloves, because his wife really likes the air conditioning cold in the winter and his hands freeze. And I'm like, okay, well, do you want fingerless mitts so that you can still do things? And he's like, no, I don't want those. So I was showing him pictures in my Ravelry notebook, and I said, oh, these are gloves I knit for a friend at the dog park. He's a photographer, and he would take pictures of the dogs, and then he'd show up, and just hand you a beautiful photo of your dog that you didn't even know he had taken. And so I made him a pair of photographer's gloves so that he could wear those at winter and still take pictures without having his hands bare. And so it's like a regular pair of gloves, but like the top maybe inch isn't there, so that he can still use his fingers and thumbs. And my friend Scott's like, that would be perfect. And he brought a real camera for the weekends in order to take pictures and not just, use an iPhone. He's going to get gloves. Oh, the other question I ask everybody is, what colors they want. And do they want self-striping socks, or do they want like a more solid color with a texture pattern? So most people wanted the self-striping. And then my old roommate, Linda, she wanted purple. And I'm like, well, do you want a solid purple, or do you want like a tonal purple? She's like, oh, I want a tonal purple. Most of the people were asking, like one person said blues and greens, another said blues, greens, and grays were the colors that they like. Another blues and purples. Linda wanted purple. So they were like kind of all in the same color range. And then my friend Pat, who I don't just know from college, we've known each other since 10th grade math class. He's an architect, and he's like, you know what? You choose what color, anything goes. It's like, oh, okay. So I got home, and I'm looking at everybody's color choices. I'm looking at my stash. I happen to have quite a lot of yarn that's in the blues and greens, because for whatever reason, when I usually give people a choice, I do stash sock yarn so that when I'm going to knit somebody a pair of socks, I can offer them and then they say what kind of colors they want. I pull out everything that's in that range. Or I might just say, oh, I have all this new sock yarn. Does anybody want any socks from this? And I send out an iMessage, and somebody will say, I want this one, or I want that one. And the blues and greens never get taken for whatever reason. So a lot of those. Then I saw this one ball of yarn that I don't think I bought at a yarn shop. I think I bought at, like, our guild will have a garage sale every year or two. People will donate yarn. Like, I have donated yarn. Like, if I'm clearing out stash, I'm like, I am never going to use this. I will donate it to the guild. If it's really high-end yarn, they save it for a silent auction in December as a fundraiser for the guild. But if it's like basic regular yarn, they might have a garage sale. Sometimes a guild member dies and their family is, you know, going through all of their yarn. They donate it to the guild, and then the guild will have a garage sale. So I think that's where I got this yarn. And I've always loved it. And for whatever reason, I haven't made myself a pair of socks from it, but nobody ever picks it. And so I thought, you know, he might actually appreciate this. Here is one of the socks on my little foot model. So it's this black yarn, and the repeat has 10 stripes. So it's, I've got black at the top, and the repeat ends with this yellow stripe here, and then it starts again. So there's 10 stripes. 3 of the colors repeat twice. 4 of them are there once. The stripes are different widths. The amount of black in between each stripe is different. So it's almost like it's random, but it does repeat. What I realized, though, when I was getting ready to start this, so he's a tallish guy. He's like he's probably 5'11", 6 feet, but he's got biggish feet. And what I realized was the yarn brand was Laine. And that's the brand that I bought at the yarn shop in Utrecht, Netherlands. And I was so excited to see like all of this solid color sock yarns, which could be used for contrast heels or just as solid yarns. It can be hard in local yarn shops around here to find yarns like that. So I was really excited about that. And then a couple people in the comments, when I was talking about that Utrecht yarn, said, oh, did you find the spool of reinforcing yarn in the middle? And I'd forgotten about that because I have had Laine yarn before. So this is what's left of the yarn, but this is what is in the center of it. And so it is the same colorway. You have to dig down to see some of the other colors in here. And it's meant, you can either knit it together with the main yarn when you're knitting the heels and toes, or you can use it as a reinforcing yarn or a darning yarn later if you get thin spots. There is a complaint in the Ravelry comments. People complain that there isn't enough to knit it together with both heels and both toes entirely, which doesn't strike me as a problem because it usually isn't the entire toe or the entire heel that's an issue. Usually there's an issue in certain places. For me, the issue is on the ball of my toes, the ball of my foot. It's not even the toes. The ball of my foot or the under part of the heel. It isn't the back of the heel. So for me, the reinforcing I would do, if I wanted to, would be to kind of weave it in on the inside of the sock. If I wanted to reinforce it. That's how I would do it. But the other problem with this is that, so this was a 100-gram ball of yarn, but that included this, which weighs 10 grams. So there was really, it was 92 grams of yarn in this. So not a full 100 grams of yarn. And I had knit socks for somebody. I like them to match. Some people don't care. They finish one sock and then start the next one and the stripes don't match. And they're fine with that, and they don't care that they don't match. I care. Like, that is like a non-negotiable for me. They have to match. That's drive me crazy if they don't. And that usually means you get to the end of the sock and you're partway through one of the repeats. So you have to wind off yarn until you get to the beginning of the next repeat. So that was going to be an issue with this, that was there even going to be enough yarn? If I didn't care if they matched, was there enough yarn? No. I do spreadsheets. I do stitch counts. I started, and I knew how long Pat wanted the leg. Like some people would say, well, just knit toe, divide it in half, knit toe up until you run out of yarn. But then you could end up with a short sock. And again, they might not match. That isn't what I wanted. I wanted something with a leg that was the length that they wanted. So I start with cuff down. I see how long the repeat is. I weigh the yarn. How many grams was that repeat? So how many repeats are there likely in the ball? I saw that there were 7. And that isn't going to work. You can't divide 7 in half and just use half for each. Because if I were to knit this one and I got, you know, first 3 repeats and then I got partway into the 4th, I'd have to wind off in order to be at the beginning of the 5th repeat, and then I'd only have 3 for that. And the other yarn would not be in the right sequence. So these are all the things that matter to me that may not matter to somebody else. What I was able to figure out is that if I used contrast yarn for the heels and the toes, I would need 3 repeats for the leg and the foot. And I knew that, well, if I ran out a little bit before the toe started, I could just switch to the contrast yarn and work in the contrast yarn a little bit, you know, longer. So that way I was kind of sweating it out a little bit with the first sock, but I was able to make it work. And there is some left, you know, left over. There is 1 repeat left over. Could be used for some little scrappy project that I won't ever do, but somebody else maybe in the future might want to do when they get a hold of my bin of leftovers, which I bring to places every so often. When someone says they're doing a scrappy project and they need fingering weight yarn, I bring in all my sock leftovers and let them pick. So I chose a gray heel. I did have some gray Regia yarn that was pretty close to the gray stripe here, and then I had this nice bright blue that matched the blue. Originally I was going to do the heels in blue, and I thought, no, I'll just tone it down a little bit with the gray. And then I thought, oh, but I'm going to do the toes. Like I said, he's an architect. He's creative. He said anything goes. Hopefully he will like these. But I want to go to the overhead, and I want to show you the kinds of things I think about when I'm customizing socks, because everybody's feet are different. So this is an example of a foot tracing that I would use in order to get the information I need to knit somebody a pair of socks. So I trace the foot along here. Then again, I take measurements. So I measure the circumference of the ankle, the circumference of the ball of foot, the circumference of the heel diagonal. I get all of those 3. I get the foot length from the tracing, and then I ask them, you know, when they're standing there, where do you want your socks to hit on your leg? And then I measure from the floor to that top point, so that when I know how long the heel is going to be, you know, and when I decide what kind of heel I'm going to knit, and I know how long that's going to be, then I can figure out, well, how long does the leg need to be altogether? One thing that's really interesting to me is to always look at people's toe shapes. And on the surface, they often look very similar. There can be quite a difference in how steep this angle is with the toes, how similar in length, especially these middle toes are. Some people have a longer second and third toe than they have a great toe. And so all of those things affect the shape. It might affect the type of toe that I knit, but it's more likely that it will affect the shaping rate of the toe that I select. So for Pat, I wanted to use a wedge toe. A wedge toe is the toe that I use most often. Sometimes I do use a round toe. As an example, the socks that I just knit for myself, this was knit with a bulkier yarn. It was knit with a 6-ply sock yarn. And so I have a wedge toe. So it's kind of that trapezoidal shape, which a lot of people object to. They don't like the corners, but they also like, well, that's not the way people's feet are shaped. And the goal of this is to simulate something that's rounded like this, which people's feet aren't shaped that way either, but commercial socks are shaped that way. You create something that's curved, and then it's going to fit around your toes. So I have this sock toe right here, which is a wedge toe. It hasn't been washed yet, hasn't been worn yet. So the first time I put these on, these little corners are going to appear. But I will show you the socks I'm currently wearing, which also have a wedge toe. And these are over 10 years old, so my toenail's starting to poke through. But it fits my foot exactly. My foot is not trapezoidal shape. It's also not shaped so that it comes to a point in the middle. The way that a wedge toe works is that the decreases on this side come up almost right to the top of the toe. And then the part that's grafted rides across the top of that toe and then across the second toe. And then the other decreased line is riding along the top of these toes. So this decreased line is on the side of my big toe, but it's on top of these. And so it just curves around and it adjusts and it stretches to fit your foot. Now, it doesn't, I can use the actual formula that's typically used, which is to decrease 4 stitches, 2 on each side, every other round until I'm down to 1/3 of the remaining stitches, and then I can graft it. And that will typically fit my foot perfectly. Some people have differently shaped toes. They might be a lot longer toes, whatever. And so I might need to change the shaping rate for those people. For my friend Pat, what I did was I chose a wedge toe, but I'm using what's called the 4-3-2-1 method of shaping. So what you see here is that this is much rounder right here, and it's meant to fit his toe more rounded. Now, it doesn't fit on this exactly, but it will eventually. It will end up going kind of like this, and it will fit on his foot. It's going to adjust to his left foot like this, and to his right foot it will adjust over like this. But making the sock symmetrical means that you can wear it on either foot. Does that mean that you should not knit asymmetrical sock toes, which is what some people do? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means that if you do that, you can only wear them on the right one can only be on the right foot and the left one can only be on the left foot. And so if you tend to wear out your socks, say under your big toe, you're going to get that on both of them, where if you could switch the toes randomly or socks randomly back and forth, you'll get more even wear on the back. It's a choice. But there's no right or wrong, but it's a choice. But this isn't wrong either. But you can see how what the 4-3-2-1 shaping rate does is you work your first decrease, and then you work 4 plain rounds, and then you work the next one, and then you work 3 plain rounds, and then a decrease round, 2 plain rounds, a decrease round, 1 plain round, and then you just keep doing decrease rounds until you're down to typically the rule of thumb is 1/3 of the stitches that you started with. But it doesn't have to be if your feet are shaped differently. So let me show you another example from my friends. This is my friend Brian. And this looks kind of crazy here. But if you saw his feet, what you would see is that his big toe is right here, and then his second toe is right here. So there's like a big gap between his 2 toes. He's always had that gap, but he's worked from home for the past 15 years without wearing shoes, and his feet have spread. So that gap between them is bigger. So I'm looking at his foot, which is larger in circumference than my friend Pat's. His toes are longer, like this is his little toe, and so Pat was like 2 inches long I needed to do, and this is more like 2.5 inches long. And then it has this really wide shape up here. So for reasons I don't want to explain right now, I'm going to work his socks toe up. Well, I can't explain it. He wants them a certain length. I'm going to have to knit until I run out of yarn because he's got bigger feet. And so I have this sock set where I have 50-gram balls that were dyed exactly the same, this striping, and then I have like a 27-gram ball of contrast. And so I'm going to use this for the toes and heels. And there's probably going to be some left over that I can use for the top ribbing as well. And I'm going to need all of this in order to get the total leg length that Brian wants. But this was a toe situation. I hadn't tried before. At first, I did a toe like Pat's, where I did a 4-3-2-1, because I was thinking, well, he's wider at top. Maybe that would make sense. And I knit it, and I saw how wide the toe was up here. So your feet are 3-dimensional. So this is like 2¼ inches wide. So there'd be 2¼ inches across the top of the foot and 2 along the sole, but you have thickness as well. You also have negative ease. So I can knit pretty close to these dimensions up here, and it's probably going to fit his foot okay. So I ended up, instead of like 24, 26 stitches to start at the top, I have like 38, because it's just so wide up here. So I started out wider, and you can see that, oh, well, it doesn't match this exactly, but it will. You know, this is going to come across here, and it will come around his foot. So this will conform to his foot shape eventually, but I can make this a symmetrical toe, and it will fit him. But I can use this as a kind of a guideline, like, is this about the right width at each point? Yeah, and it's also going to stretch. I was starting out with a lot more to begin with. I started up here. I had 2 plain rounds between each of the increased rounds, and then I went to 3 rounds. And then when I got to the end of the contrast, I actually increased 8 stitches altogether, because look at how narrow it is here, and then all of a sudden it jumps up to here. So I thought, well, I'm going to try that. I'm going to go right up to 8 extra stitches right here to get the full stitch count for his foot. And we'll see. What I'm guessing is that it will fit him pretty well. And it's going to fit him better than if I'd used just a basic sock formula, going by the numbers and not paying any attention to how his foot was actually shaped. So it will fit better than that, and it will probably fit him pretty well. If I were going to continue knitting him socks in the future, then I would make sure that I could either see in person how it fit, or I'm going to have him take pictures of it when he's wearing them so I can see how they fit, and then get feedback that way for any tweaks in the future. Because even after 20 years of sock knitting, I've knit myself probably 50 pairs of socks over the years. I still tweak things or try things differently to see what might work. But this was an approach I wanted to show you about sock toes, because you can use the same basic sock toe, but you can alter how you do the shaping, the rate of shaping when you're using that same wedge toe. These are all the same toe. All 3 of these are the same toe, but they're for 3 very differently shaped feet, and also different sizes. Their feet are much bigger. My foot is about 8½ inches in circumference. His is, I think, 10 inches in circumference, and his is 10¾ inches. So there's a big difference in the size of the foot. But these are all a wedge toe. It's just that they are shaped in order to fit the foot that will be wearing them. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video, or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.